Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're doing something a little different. Usually when we talk about financial crises, we talk about them as events,
Right.
the movie version. Frantic phone calls, late night meetings, the panic of a specific week in 2008 or maybe 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But the documents we're looking at today, specifically STA 8.2 financial rescue schemes off budget, they suggest that looking at these things as events is maybe a mistake.
It's the difference between looking at the weather and looking at the climate. Or, to use that mini-fails framework, it's the difference between the narrative layer, what we see on the news, and the OS layer.
The operating system running underneath.
Exactly.
And that operating system has a very specific name in these notes. They call it the institutionalization of rescue. The core idea here is that too big to fail isn't a slogan. It's not some policy decision made by one person.
No.
It's a structural feature that's been, well, hard-coded into the financial system over the last 40 years.
That is the key shift. We think of a bailout as an exceptional measure. A fire truck you only call when the house is on fire.
Right.
But STA 8.2 argues that these exceptional measures have effectively become the building code. The fire truck is now permanently parked in the living room.
And the plumbing is routed through it.
Yes, which changes everything.
It does. We have a lot to get through. We need to unpack that plumbing, the mechanisms like special purpose vehicles. We need to talk about why decision-making shifted from politicians to technocrats. And most importantly, what does this all mean for risk? I mean, if the safety net is always on, does market failure even exist anymore?
That is the billion-dollar question, or maybe the trillion-dollar question.
Let's start with the how, the mechanics. The source says this didn't start in 2008. It traces it back to the 1970s. Why start there?
Well, the 1970s is really when the complexity of global finance started to accelerate. You had the breakdown of Bretton Woods, currencies floating,
Right.
and financial markets just began to grow faster than the real economy. The speed of finance increased.
And as the market got faster, the old tools for dealing with failure, like a normal bankruptcy court, they just started to look too slow.
Way too slow and too dangerous.
Because bankruptcy is a legal process.
Okay.
It takes time. You've got judges, creditors, hearings. If a huge global bank starts failing at 9 a.m., you can't wait for a court hearing next month.
Exactly. So central banks, treasuries, they needed new tools that could match the speed of the market. And this is where we see the rise of the SPV.
The special purpose vehicle.
Yes.
I feel like SPV is one of those acronyms people hear, assume it's boring accounting, and just tune out. But here it seems like the SPV is the weapon of choice. How does it work in a rescue?
Think of it as a containment unit. Structurally, it's just a legal entity, a company created for one specific job.
Okay.
In a crisis, a bank might be holding billions in toxic assets loans that aren't getting paid back. Those assets threaten to pull the whole bank under.
And the central bank can't just buy those bad assets directly.
No, it would pollute its own balance sheet or break its own rules.
So they create an SPV to do the dirty work.
Essentially, yes. The SPV sits outside the normal balance sheet. It's an off-budget entity. The central bank lends money to the SPV, and the SPV uses that money to buy the bad assets from the failing bank.
So the bank gets cash, the bad assets are quarantined in the SPV.
And the crisis is, theoretically, contained.
It's a side pocket. You take the mess, you shove it in the side pocket, and zip it up so the main pair of pants still looks clean.
That's a vivid way of putting it, but yes. And the critical term used there is off-budget. That's the game changer.
Okay, let's drill into that, because off-budget sounds a lot like off-democracy, doesn't it?
I mean, that's the implication.
If the government wants to build a highway, that's on budget. It's in the spending bill. Parliament or Congress debates it. They vote on it.
And the public can see the price tag. Correct. That is the standard fiscal process. It's transparent, but it is slow.
It has political friction.
It does. But an SPV operation, that's a financial transaction. It happens through the plumbing of the central bank. It doesn't necessarily require a vote in the legislature. It can happen overnight.
This brings us to that idea in the mini-fields notes, speed shear. I found this fascinating. It's this mismatch between market speed and the speed of democracy.
It's a temporal problem. Modern markets operate in milliseconds. Algorithms trade at the speed of light.
Right.
But democratic legislatures, by design, they operate in months or years. They are meant to be slow. They're deliberative.
So when a crisis hits, you have this shear. The market is collapsing at 1,000 miles per hour, and Parliament is debating at 5 miles per hour.
And that gap, that shear, is where the technocrats step in. The argument is that you can't fight a digital fire with an analog bucket brigade.
You need a system that can react instantly.
Exactly. So over the last 40 years, we've built this rescue architecture that bypasses the slow lane of democracy and uses the fast lane of central banking.
Which, makes sense from a survival standpoint. If the economy's crashing, you want the fire put out, you don't want a committee meeting.
Of course.
But the source material suggests this created a permanent shift. We didn't just build a fast lane for emergencies. We started routing all the traffic through it.
And that is the structural transition. This is the most crucial part of STA 8.2. Initially, these SPVs and rescue tools were justified as exceptional.
Use them once, save the world, then put them away.
Yes, but they didn't get dismantled.
They became part of the OS.
They became the implementation layer for financial stability. The market started to realize this machinery was always there, just humming in the background. And this leads to what the source calls the sinking of decisions.
The sinking of decisions. It sounds like a submarine movie, but I think it means the decision to rescue isn't really a decision anymore, is it?
Not in the traditional political sense, no. In the past, if you wanted to bail out an industry, a leader had to stand up and say, I am choosing to use public money to save this company.
It was a political risk. They could be voted out for it.
There was a responsibility subject, someone to point at, to blame.
But now
The process has sunk into that technocratic layer. It's become automated. The source compares it to a thermostat in a house.
Okay, a thermostat, it doesn't ask the homeowner for permission every time the temperature drops.
No.
It just kicks in.
Precisely. The central bank and regulators have set the parameters. They've defined what stability looks like. Interest rate spreads, liquidity ratios. If the market data crosses those lines, if the room gets too cold,
the rescue mechanism kicks in automatically.
Liquidity is injected, swap lines are opened, SPVs are activated.
So the decision to spend billions isn't a moral choice or the political debate. It's just the algorithm executing its code.
It's technical rationality. The justification is no longer, we think this is good for the country. The justification is, the system requires this input to maintain functionality.
That is incredibly efficient, but also kind of terrifying for accountability. If I'm angry about a bailout, who do I yell at? I can't yell at a thermostat.
You can try, but it won't change the temperature. And this is where democratic accountability gets replaced by professional justification.
Meaning the people running the system, the central bankers, the technocrats, they aren't elected.
No, they're professionals. Their duty is to the stability of the system, not to the sentiment of the voter.
And because the system is so complex with SPVs and collateral frameworks and all that, the average voter, and frankly the average politician, can't even understand what's happening.
That opacity is a feature, not a bug. It shields the rescue operations from political interference. But it also means that responsibility subject, the blame, it gets dispersed. It's spread so thin across the network of institutions that it effectively disappears.
Okay, so we have a system that runs on autopilot, bypassing democracy to match market speed. Let's pivot to the consequences. Because if I'm a trader or a bank CEO, and I know this system exists, I know that thermostat is set to save.
It has to change how you behave.
Right.
This is the section on institutionalized expectation. And it's fundamental to understanding modern markets. In a true free market, the kind you read about in textbooks discipline is enforced by the fear of failure.
If you take a reckless gamble and lose, you go bust. That fear keeps you honest.
It's market discipline, the invisible hand that slaps you when you do something stupid.
Exactly.
But if the market participants know that the rescue OS is active, if they know a systemic failure will trigger the thermostat, then that fear of failure just evaporates. The risk calculation changes completely.
You stop pricing the risk of the asset going to zero.
And you start pricing the probability of the central bank stepping in.
You're betting on the bailout, not the business.
In many ways, yes. And this incentivizes size. If you are small, the thermostat might not notice you freezing. But if you are massive, systemically important, you are right next to the sensor. You know the heat will come on.
So the logical move is to get as big and interconnected as possible to make sure you're covered by that safety net.
It effectively subsidizes risk-taking for the biggest players.
It's like having an insurance policy you don't pay for, but it only pays out if you burn down the whole neighborhood.
And that leads to the distortion of prices. When a risk isn't priced correctly, capital goes to the wrong places. It flows into speculative bubbles because the downside is capped by the state.
This brings us to that membrane concept in the notes, the quasi-fiscalization of the central bank. That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's the constitutional heart of the problem. Traditionally, there is a wall between fiscal policy and monetary policy.
Fiscal is the government taxing and spending. That's politics. Monetary is the central bank managing interest rates. That's technocrats.
Keep them separate. One spends money, the other protects its value. That's the theory. But STA 8.2 argues these rescue schemes dissolve that membrane.
How so?
When a central bank uses an SPV to buy corporate debt or prop up a market, they are effectively allocating resources. They're deciding which sectors survive.
Which sounds a lot like spending money.
It is fiscal action. They are putting public resources at risk to support specific parts of the economy. But because they do it through the plumbing, through liquidity and balance sheet expansion, they call it monetary policy.
And that bypasses the power of the purse that belongs to the legislature.
It does, and this creates a feedback loop because politicians often prefer this.
Wait, really? I'd think they'd be angry about losing power.
Well, think about it. In a crisis, a politician has two choices. Option A, go to Parliament, propose a massive bailout bill, raise taxes to pay for it, and face voter anger.
Okay.
Option B, quietly call the central bank and have them handle it through the plumbing with no vote and no immediate tax hike.
Option B is a political free lunch.
Exactly. The politicians can wash their hands of it. They can say, oh, that's the independent central bank doing its job. It allows the state to intervene without taking political responsibility for the intervention.
So everyone is kind of complicit. The politicians avoid hard choices, the banks get a safety net, the technocrats get more power. The only person left out is the one trying to figure out why the free market feels so rigged.
And that brings us to the idea that free market is arguably a misnomer here. We're looking at a managed market, a market where the prerequisite for its existence is the guarantee of state intervention.
Failure is literally not an option.
The system can't tolerate the cascade. So we've built a world where profits are privatized, but catastrophic risks are socialized through this invisible operating system.
This brings us to the closing questions in the notes, which are pretty existential. The first one is about discipline. If the system removes the fear of failure for the big guys, where does that discipline go? It has to go somewhere.
Physics dictates that pressure doesn't disappear, it just moves. If large institutions are protected, the discipline likely falls on the actors outside the safety net.
Small businesses, individual savers?
Those who hold cash that's being devalued by the liquidity injections, they face the raw volatility while the systemic core is insulated.
So the storm still rages, but the castle has the windows sealed shut while the villagers are outside getting wet.
That's one way to visualize the risk transfer.
The other question that struck me was about reversibility. We've built this massive automated thermostat over 40 years. Can we ever turn it off?
That is the hardest question. The text talks about a ratchet effect. Every crisis leads to a new layer of intervention, new tools, new SPVs, and once the market adjusts to that new level of support,
Taking it away becomes an act of destabilization itself. If you turn off the thermostat now, the house freezes immediately because it forgot how to retain its own heat.
exactly, the dependency becomes structural. If a central bank announced tomorrow, we are going back to a 19th century model, no bailouts, if you fail, the market would likely collapse instantly.
Because that rescue expectation is baked into the price of everything.
Everything.
So we're trapped in the operating system we built.
Trapped might be a strong word, but we are certainly constrained by it. We've traded the acute pain of occasional collapse for the chronic condition of permanent management. The question isn't, how do we go back?
Because we probably can't.
The question is, how do we govern this?
Right. If the decisions have sunk into the plumbing, how do we shine a light down there? How do we ensure this technical rationality serves the public good and not just the preservation of the financial sector?
That is the challenge for the next generation of policymakers. We need a way to bring democratic oversight back into the OS layer. We need to understand the plumbing as well as the bankers do.
Because as long as we treat these things as boring accounting details, we're ceding control of the economy to the people who write the footnotes.
That's the risk.
That is a sobering thought. We usually end these with a takeaway, and I think today's is pretty clear. When you see a headline about a financial rescue, don't just look at the dollar amount. Look for the mechanism. Look for the SPV. Ask yourself, is this an emergency measure? Or is this just a machine doing what it was programmed to do?
And remember that in this system, silence is often where the real action is happening.
On that note, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks for diving into the plumbing with us today. It's dense stuff, but it matters. We'll see you on the next deep dive.